Thank you very much for showing up and joining in for this highly interesting event and occasion, namely the first European Business Jam. Actually, I will explain a little bit later what it is about, but I would like to, first of all, frame the topic and this event today. As you probably know, in 1999, there was this European Accord which was signed by 29 European universities, nations, saying, well, we would like to switch to this, what we call the Bologna structure of higher education programs. Meaning that, for instance, in Austria, we left the 5 years program and we switched to the first 3-year bachelor program and then a second step, namely the master program, and then coming up with PhD programs. So this was a huge change in the higher education area, in particular in Europe, but of course also for Austria and specifically for WU. WU was the first university who switched completely to the Bologna architect, and we had a lot of internal discussion about what does this mean, if you have this bachelor, what is this exactly, what should people know after having graduated from a bachelor program, and this kind of thing. So there were discussions going on, and we thought that now it's a good time after so many years' experiences to reflect a little bit on what does this mean to have an undergraduate business education for higher education and higher education institutions. And additionally, we had in May this year, we had what we called the Future Conference of WU. So we were discussing the issue, how would WU look like in the year 2035? And also this was, of course, a hot issue was what would the programs look like, and in particular, what would be the purpose of higher education in business and economics. So this is just that you know a little bit. There were some ongoing discussions before we were offered by Thomas Howard to organize this European Business Jam. So first of all, I would like to welcome you, of course. I'm also very happy that some of our Sigma network partners are joining already, because we will have a meeting tomorrow. So the Sigma network is the Societal Impact and Global Management Alliance. We will have our annual meeting tomorrow, and we thought it could be a nice idea to combine those two occasions, those two meetings, and having also some international and European guests in this discussion. Now, well, what is a jam? You know, a jam is a little bit an informal occasion, so that's why we invite you, of course, to join, to discuss, to intervene, to be highly interactive, but also, you know, take a coffee or take a sweet and sit down and discuss with us. So we will have some guests on the panel, kind of, you know, having an initiative role, but of course it should be a dialogue, it should be a discourse on the future and the purpose of undergraduate business education. Now, the Business Education Jam is kind of a global series of dialogues on the future of management and education, and the first jam I learned was already in 2014 at Boston University. And since then, Africa, Asia, Northern America, now Europe is hosting this Business Education Jam. And of course, we would like to have the opportunity today to talk about 20 years after the start of the Bologna process. Where do we stand and where are we going? So we will have 3 sessions, each of them about 30 minutes, and then we have a kind of a final round, wrapping up things we have talked about. As I already said, this is an interactive format, so please feel free to interrupt and to intervene. And we also have, and that's also a nice issue of the Business Education Jam, we have a live stream, so we can of course also welcome those who are watching online, who might not so easily intervene and interrupt us. So I would like to introduce our guests on the panel, on the so-called on-site part of this jam. We have Howard Thomas, who invented, so to say, this series. He is from his background strategy professor, but he has been dean at several business schools, and he is a good advisor, very experienced guy, and also member of the International Advisory Board of WU, and is coming up always with very good ideas how we could improve. So thank you, Howard, for joining us, and we will have later the chance to talk to you. I also would like to welcome Pear Alton Andersen. He is an economist, right? Has been. Now and currently he's president of Copenhagen Business School, and these nice guys will talk about the academic view on business education, the future of business education. We will also welcome Edith Littich, our well-known vice rector for academic programs and student affairs, who will talk to Katrin Haas. She's a BBE student, but she, I think, is still writing an exam, but she will show up immediately after this exam. And we'll talk a little bit about the students' perspective on business education. And then we have also represented, and this was also the idea of this jam today, the business view, the corporate view. So I'm very happy that Bettina Augeneder, she's a WU alumna, but also HR director of Coca-Cola, joining us. She also attended this future conference, so she was already actively talking and discussing about the future of business education, in particular of WU. And yeah, I would like to welcome you on the panel as our first discussant. You are allowed to applaud, you are allowed to make noise, whatever. So,
thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Now, Coca-Cola is one of the largest brands worldwide.
True, yeah.
Yeah, your company is a true global player, and the first question, icebreaker question, so to say, is when you are hiring business graduates, what are you expecting to see in their CVs?
What we would love to see is that people actually have a broad and diverse experience also when it comes to languages, so that we can see that they also can interact in an international environment. What is also great if we would see is that they have also, next to the intense studies, also have some working experience. Yeah, I think that's also very beneficial, that they have done internships, that they have been, of course, working also, on weekends or whatever they do, but just to show this engagement as well here. That's important. Plus, of course, we also look into if people have done some social responsibility, additional things, like if they have been members of ISEC or also have worked, for example, in communities to also add. So it's actually, we look into what is working experience, what is also adding to the international experience, because as said, we think diversity is key, in all teams that we then build together, and therefore that's mainly what we are looking into.
Is there anything you are missing?
I have to say, I was now actually seeing a student friend of mine here in the auditorium. That was very a great thing to see. And I remember back, it's kind of time ago that I have finished my studies. And when I look today what the youngsters, so to say, from the university bring actually to the table, I have to really admit it's quite a lot. They are having a very solid education. Most of them have been abroad. They have actually some languages that are talking much more fluently than it was the case years ago. Yeah, so I think that young graduates bring a lot to the table. To be honest, I think there's always, of course, you cannot have it all. Yeah, you bring a good set, and then it's also, of course, the interest of the individuum plus the company to make it even more shine what is already there. Yeah.
But when you look back now to this new way of this Bologna architecture, and when we introduced the bachelor program, how did you perceive this idea of having those 3 years program graduates?
To be very honest, it took me personally a while to really get adjusted to the different curriculums. Yeah, so I have to always because I was used more to the older module, so it was more my issue. Yeah, to be very honest. But what we saw is actually a very good combination that people still came with a very solid and good foundation. And what I appreciated a lot is that when then people went to take the master's program, some already work part-time. I think that's also very good and enriching their careers, and I think it's actually a very good combination. So I would see that this is actually a progress. Yeah.
So we should go on.
Yeah, I would see it like this. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is there any question of the guests? Yes, please. One moment, we have a microphone for you.
I speak as a member of the Foreign Language Business Communication Department here. I'm sure you also took language classes when you were at WU. And you mentioned languages, which of course made my ears perk up. In the discussion about languages these days, very often there seems to be a view that the only language that's needed now is English, because everyone speaks English, but you did say languages in the plural, and I was just wondering what your view on that was, and what is the role of other languages besides English?
I think personally, I mean, of course, English is nowadays the language, if you wish so, yeah. And I see a lot of improvement that is happening actually. And if you really, if I look at all the graduates coming, they have a super level of English, I must say, and that is also due to that they have been in other countries and taking studies there and also courses for sure in the summer and so forth, and that a lot of content is also delivered in English. So I think that's a big plus. But what we see as we are embedded in an international group with 28 countries, it is very beneficial if, for example, people speak Italian or also Russian language. And so, I mean, it is something that can really support them in moving around and supports mobility. That is something that we are also looking very much into when then people have started, that we also can feed our international talent pool. And for this reason, I think, of course, English is key. Nevertheless, I think in order to connect very well with the people that are then in the countries, it's always good to have a flavor of the local language. That's really helping a lot. Yeah. So the more, the better, and I think that's really supporting and helping.
Hello, my name is Marjan Khobre. I'm from the Institute of Information Systems and New Media. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with the emerging and changing environment, and how do you recognize the skill gaps and improve them? So, I mean, skills of the employees or even the job seeker. So, and what's your plan for them? Yeah, thank you.
Of course, I mean, skills and to improve skills, that's for sure something that we are working hard on as a company. You know, we have a whole team that is working actually on capabilities to always seek for new trends. And I mean, it's everywhere the buzzword of digitalization and increase technical savviness and so forth. So of course, we are having here a lot of courses. Some are still, you know, trainings that are all over the places, so to say. But what we put a lot of effort in is as well to increase our digital footprint here and have blended learning sessions, which we think is very important. Yeah, and we had just before a side conversation about it, that as well, that we really do believe that also training and increasing and enriching your capabilities should also be something that you can do on demand when you need it, and that it's also important to have it, you know, in smaller bits and pieces to really direct it and channel it to what you actually need at this very moment, because that's in all fairness a point that we do see, that time is still a factor for people that is not always so much available as you actually would wish, and then it's quite hard for people to step out so long from the business for training courses and you know, so therefore that's actually a way that we look into to increase this side of learning as well.
May I come back? So
Sure.
we got several online questions for you.
Good.
And one a little bit provocative I would like to ask you
Yeah.
was, Coca-Cola produces drinks packaged in mostly plastic bottles. How does Coca-Cola see its ecological responsibility in the context of their business? And do you strive to consider your ecological footprint more than publishing sustainability reports?
I think a very good question, and I was when I thought about coming here, I was 100% sure it will come, yeah, because it's of course if you look into the media and so forth, it's we are of course not only us, but it is a topic, the plastic topic as well, yeah, for sure, and it's for us a challenge, to be very honest, yeah. Of course, we invest a lot in driving glass propositions, but for the convenience factor, it's of course for on-the-go products. It's very handy to have, of course, a plastic bottle. So what the company is doing, and especially here in Austria, we have really done a lot. We are investing a lot to actually recycle our bottles. We have a joint venture company here. It's called Pet to Pet, and nearly all bottles, and it will be soon 100%, yeah, comes out of recycled PET. So that's a thing that we are very strong in Austria. Nevertheless, when you look at the whole system, there is absolutely a way to go. But there is a commitment from our CEO, James Quincy, that also says by 2025 they want to have, so to say, for every bottle that we bring into the market, we also recycle one. And it's now for sure a tough target. But absolutely the company is willing to invest here a lot to also help to increase our footprint in collecting plastic, and also, of course, look into innovation, how to prevent it. Yeah, that's step number one. So that's absolutely a topic for us. Yeah.
But would you see now that universities should prepare their students for these kind of new challenges?
Definitely.
How should we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to have, you know, for those kind of projects to really come to this innovation issues that you have in this topic, but also with others. I think a strong cooperation is absolutely key, so that companies like ours can also link and join curriculums, and also host classes, and also, you know, that we can send people over, and vice versa, to really increase the exchange of ideas, because a lot of things are coming actually from merging different opinions and ideas, and then the sum of all those is much greater than what the company itself only can think. And I think it's also good to have this view of, so to say, very well educated people that are not always dealing with the thing per se, because it's your job. So it's always good to have this outside-in perspective that we value a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other question here? Give me a sign. Yes, please.
Is my name. Oh, thanks. Johannes Rogi, currently master student here at WU, and also of Brunswick Group, international PR company. I was wondering, what is your opinion on the upcoming trend of more flexible structure of work in general, and what on one hand, what is your opinion on it, and secondly, what is Coca-Cola doing in that field?
I think it's a very valid question, and actually when we hire more and more young people to our organization, which is happening of course a lot, we see this trend is totally there, yeah. And to be very honest, we have a flexible working policy, yeah, that we also publish, and that we, when we have hiring interviews, also explain to people. It's actually like this, that you can at least minimum 1 day a week decide that you work from home, or as well when you are, so to say, traveling, then you don't have to come to the office back, you just do your things at home. So that's what we do increasingly. Of course, it's always depending, is the job that you are having allowing to have this flexible working arrangement, but that's something we look very much into, because we absolutely do see the trend that young people, and not only young people, but also other generations, need to accommodate their personal needs as well. And I think that's something that a modern and good employer should really look after, that you can combine that. And people make use of it, yeah, so we see it absolutely positive. And you know, if you have clear rules, a clear set of rules, that people know how to deal with it, it's actually no issue, yeah. And you know, with technology also increasing, I mean, it's no issue. Everybody's having Skype or Blue Jeans or whatever. All those kind of things are available, so it's actually no problem. It's working very well.
So, I do have one more online question, and then I give back to them. What kinds of skills do you think will people need in the future to have a successful career in an international company?
I think a fundamentum is always good that you have a very solid, in this case now, economic fundament, plus also, of course, that your major that you take, that you combine it in a positive way that you think will benefit. What I do think what we have to really look into is as well that it drive the digital and technical savviness of people. I think that's very important, yeah, because it's a trend of the time and we for sure cannot revert back. So I think that's very important. And what I also do see is that innovation for growth will be absolutely key, and that I think it's also important to really open up the horizon for people to make them aware what is out there and how to really drive growth and innovation. I think that's very important. A more practical issue, what I think we should also not underestimate, is how then to bring all that is out there also to real practical life and make it useful. Therefore, I do think that project management skills and really bringing the things then to life is also very important for graduates.
Yeah, Barbara Stöttinger, WU Executive Academy. You mentioned in your previous comment that there are new ways of working. You also talked about the skills that people need. All these people have leaders. So how do you look at leadership skills? What do leaders of today and tomorrow need, and how do you train them?
That's a fantastic question. I must really say that we do see sometimes more need for, change when it comes to the leadership style as well for people, yeah? Because, I mean, now it's not only, I would say, a generation issue, but of course it is, yeah, in a way. And I think it's also, with this, it's very much linked that also I think leadership skills need to be adjusted, and for some leaders I'm pretty sure it's quite a paradigm shift, yeah, when they get more and more, so to say, positively confronted with those new habits, yeah. So I'm a true believer that we also should skill up leaders in the way that it's a more cooperative and for sure a different leadership style that was in many companies existing before that, yeah. I think it's the base is like in all things. I think that you have a trustworthy relationship to people, especially when they are working from home and so forth. You need to have a good trust and a very good and solid relationship. And I think also in many areas it's important to set clear goals, yeah, that you say, okay, if you do it this or that way, is your decision, but we need a result, and that's X, Y, Z, yeah. And then people, I really do see they appreciate actually the freedom to deliver what they get asked. But it's more, I do see that as well, a paradigm shift, not for all, but for some that are in leadership positions. I think we also have to help them to get into the loop.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jakob. Thank you for interesting talk and interesting answers to the questions. When you're talking about the skills that you think is needed in the future, you don't really discuss attitudes and soft skills. And in higher education, we discuss that a lot, how we can also educate our graduates through societal attitudes and tolerance and global mindsets, and it have a lot of concepts and words, but you don't seem to put a lot of weight into those kind of attributes.
Maybe I have neglected this. Yeah, so it's good that you bring it up. No, I must say personally, I do think exactly what you say. That attitude for sure is something to shape as good as you can, and it of course has various sources how to do that. But I'm absolutely in line that not only the hard facts, but more the soft facts also come very much to the surface and should be looked and watched after. Yeah, and I do believe believe when graduates or students actually have work experience, or when they do social work and so forth, or are in student representatives and so forth, that they learn a lot, yeah. Because as we see it as well, they are very eager and want to step up as well fast, and that's fine, yeah. We see it especially with our management trainees, you know, they need quite a fast-paced environment and need a lot of challenges. And where we see sometimes slight gaps is as well how when they then take over leadership positions, it's for sure something where they experience that others gain over more years. That's what they still miss a bit, yeah. So I think the more they can enrich it during their studies and also through extra work or other engagements, that this is absolutely important. Sorry if I neglect it, but I can also say from my personal view, this is absolutely very important, because the rest you can easily, you know, or more easily learn and acquire, but soft skills need to be built up over years, yeah. And it's very important, especially as well when we connect it more to the virtual environment I think we are working in. I do see that we will have challenges as well to transmit that, yeah, when people are very much virtually working and not always so connected locally in offices and so forth. I think this will have even a more important stand in the whole setup, so to say, yeah. Please.
Christopher, Chairman of the Senate here at WU. As we speak about skills, future skills of students, I would be interested in, you know, these development in artificial intelligence and digitalization. I know buzzwords, but for sure this will become even stronger in the future. And I've heard voices saying, well, then you just need to increase the number of students that study software engineering. And I would kind of disagree. I would say probably this is something cross-functional to business education, because a marketing, production, operations research or strategy scholar and student also needs to have some sort of capabilities in these areas, not being necessarily a specialist. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on what students need to bring to the table in the future with regard to these very specialized and technologies?
I mean, we see absolutely a trend in more technical savviness of students and graduates. I think that's a very positive thing. They by nature grow up nearly with their mobile phones in their hands, so plus everything that comes along with that. Yeah, so that's, I think, a very positive thing, because they are not. I mean, it sounds probably strange, but when I say this, but they are not afraid of, you know, all the technical stuff that is happening. Yeah, so I think that's a very good thing that they are open to take the challenge here. And I do think, I mean, artificial intelligence, roboting. I mean, we see it as well in our plants, for example, or in our business support center that we have in Sofia. We are now also, so to say, starting to experiment with artificial intelligence and chatbots and so forth. Yeah, so I think it will come more and more, and I also do think it's not only about engineering. I think everybody should have a curiosity about it and an interest, and see how he or she can contribute. Yeah, so I think it's something where we should all be open and also show what is already there. Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, and then I mean, you don't need for everything a super specialist. Yeah, but I think it's of course some definitely you need, but I think it's more the genuine interest and curiosity that we need to foster this new mindset, if you wish so. Yeah, then I think we are all set. Yeah.
We had a small discussion, because you all mentioned several times now that, of course, the challenges are changing. Yeah. We need new knowledges, we need new capabilities, and so on and so on. And maybe I also would like to invite our Dean for the Executive Academy to comment on the issue. What is the purpose and the new ways of lifelong learning, and how are you reacting as a company? And maybe you could a little bit comment on what are the new demands coming up you can already identify.
I mean, as a company, I still have to say we are investing quite, and we happily do so, yeah, in all the different stages of careers of people. As said, we have a leadership and capabilities team, really looking very much what is state of the art and how can we enrich capabilities of people so that they are always as much up to date as they should be. Then, of course, for different talent segments, you have also your programs. Nevertheless, I do see also a personal interest of people that they should, but I would recommend, yeah, that they also look into this. How can they stay up to date? I think it's, of course, the company should offer a good variety in the menu, but I think it should be also in the genuine interest of an individual to really learn and foster new skills, yeah, because the company not only can cover all that's going on. So I think it's actually good that things like that programs are existing, and of course, yeah, I also think it's good if people join and have this mindset for career-long learning, because this time things are changing so fast. Yeah, so if you don't keep up with the pace, one can argue how can you then work until 60, 70 or longer if you're not, so to say, in the loop, yeah. So I think it's important.
Mrs. Schöttinger, what are the most let's say, demanded modules and offers, programs you are offering? What are people asking for?
Yeah, let me just go one step back. I think what we see in the lifelong learning environment is a portfolio of opportunities that people can use. Yeah, you can go online if you want to know something more about artificial intelligence, and you find different offers where you get this self-paced learning. I think this is great because we see a variety where you can actually take up the demand when it arises and work on your skills and knowledge. I think it depends on the level of exchange and the type of knowledge that you want to generate. So if it's content, quick, self-paced, all these offers are great. I mean, those people that we work with typically come back to the university to get a much deeper immersion into topics. Yeah, and talking about self-interest, that's the crowd that we get. They're self-interested, they come back, they want to learn more. And I think at that level, they also learn a lot from each other. So I think it depends very much on what you're looking at and where you get your source. Yeah. In terms of where we focus on is definitely strengthening leadership challenges and training people to deal with leadership challenges of today, being it in terms of content, what you need to know about artificial intelligence, blockchain, digitization, and so on, but also learning in the exchange with seasoned executives of how people in different parts of the world, different industries, different roles deal with those challenges. And I think at that level, the exchange with each other is very important. Yeah? And that's, I believe, not something that you can fully outsource to the online environment. After all, we are still humans and we want to see and feel each other and exchange and build a trustworthy network. Yeah, but I think it depends very much on what type of knowledge you want to gain and when you need it and how deep it has to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was one question behind you.
My name is Alexandra Lachwood. I was just wondering, because we're talking about lifelong learning and skills that people should have and internationalization, languages and so on, and you were also talking about careers. I would be interested in your perspective on a career. Like, is it something that you have in a company, like really career, or because of all the languages maybe people are talking, do they spend maybe 1-2 years at your firm and then just move on? So what are your what is your definition of a career nowadays, maybe?
That's a very good input. I think it also has changed, yeah, because in the past it also happened that people stayed 10, 15, 25 more years with the company. Now we do see absolutely a trend that people stay 3-4 years. They sometimes go on a gap year, take a world trip, learn something, go back to university and come back again, or go to another company and come back. Yeah, so I think it's not you start there and then you go to retirement. I think this is happening very rarely. Yeah, so I would really see it more broad, that you get also your different experiences in different companies. Absolutely, that's what we do see. This is more the trend.
Giuseppe Del Mestre, Change Management at the WU. Parallel to our meeting here, there is a few kilometers away in Katowice, the climate change, climate conference. And there are several other issues in the world today, inequality, migrations. My question regards how far are the values of Coca-Cola considering issues of ethical paradoxes. Nowadays, managers found themselves in ethical paradoxes. Should I increase turnover or should I look at the environment? What do you think is important for university to build also the ethical understanding of the students, and how you further this in your company?
I can only say, that the ethical standards and adhering to compliance and so forth is, of course, a very high value of the company. Nevertheless, and it's also important to say, the company is here to make profit and positive results. So, of course, I think it has to be a balance, yeah. By really looking into innovative ideas, I'm pretty sure that also, the topic around plastic and how to deal with all those things, we will come up with good solutions, and that's necessary. But for sure, this is the fundamentum. But yeah, making results is also a reality. Yeah, so I think, as said, it should be a good balance to do so. And for sure, I mean, this is something that we also, when people come to the company and they get onboarded, that's for sure something that is always on our agenda to make them aware. And we are also following up intensively if those principles are not followed. So.
Okay. So, we are running out of time. So, Mrs. Augenecker-Bettina, I thank you very much for joining us, for giving us a little bit an insight on the corporate expectations from university or concerning business education. We give now the floor to, we make a little gender switch.
Yeah,
so we
thanks
ask
a lot.
Pear and Howard to show up. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wrote a presentation for this, which you can read on the website afterwards. But I'd like to just raise two issues, and then I'm going to ask Pear to raise two issues, and then we'll throw it open for discussion. The two issues I want to raise are to do with, first of all, undergraduate business education, because in my view, much of the complaints about business education and management education have come about graduate management education rather than undergraduate management education. And I'm sure many of the people in this room are aware of critiques such as those of Henry Mintzberg and others about business schools being no more than finishing schools, no more than, ways of training elites, and really not getting down to the kind of issues that I hear already some of the people in this room discussing. So the two things I wanted to focus on, well, one, this is an European jam, and I think we should focus on European identity rather than anything else. And you'll see why I think that in a second. I will say that I'm very troubled in saying European identity after having watched the television last night and watched what I would call the shambles and the mess that characterizes British political life, for which I apologize. I apologize for the leadership. I apologize for everything else. I am actually Welsh. So, so from the language perspective of someone in this room, je suis au Pays de Galles, and for the Germans, ich bin ein Walliser. So I'm Welsh, not English. So, the Welsh have a very good tradition of leadership, but I'm not going to go into that today. What I do want to do is to pose two issues. One is about European identity, and at least in management education, particularly at the undergraduate level, there is a far more established tradition of liberal management education throughout Europe than there has ever been in some Anglo-Saxon countries. And it's that I want to focus on. Because it seems to me that we should be looking at the whole question of liberal management education. I also already see one or two people in the audience talking about tolerance and global mindsets and talking about skills of trust and things of that kind. Now, how do we embed those, or how do we embed skills of leadership? And one of the advantages of liberal management education is that it is a blend of what one might call the current technical skills in management, but also a study of the humanities and of the social sciences, and particularly history and the social sciences in the context of society. And I think the blend of those two things is terribly important. So that's my one thing that I want to make sure I establish. The other thing is that the only significant report on undergraduate management education that's come from the United States compared to all of the others is the Colby report in 2011 from the Carnegie Foundation. And actually, they were talking about a tradition of liberal management education, but the tradition of liberal management education here is not the same as the tradition that exists in Europe. And I'd like to generate the debate around Europe, not the United States. So Pear, by way of introduction, I don't know what's on your mind, but why don't you have an equivalent 2 minutes to shoot the breeze before we start posing questions?
I think you spent 5 minutes, didn't you?
Did I? Yeah. Well, you know, this is a Welsh tradition.
Yes.
You know,
Yes, and I think you were talking.
We cannot keep the time.
I think you were talking about Lloyd George, actually.
Yes.
You? Yes. You
well,
were.
or Aneurin Bevan, as an example,
yes.
the founder of the National Health Service.
I have two issues I would like to address, and one has already been addressed, and that's the topic of lifelong learning. A lot of people, in my view, think that lifelong learning is something you add now and again, a 3 weeks course here, or a 2 weeks course there, or you take an internet-based course. In my view, it's a whole transformation of the present educational system. And let me just give you two examples. At least in our part of the world, the life expectancy of our children will probably be 40–50% higher than ours. And even our generation is predicted to turn on average 100 years in lifespan expectancy. So the need for education lifelong means lifelong, not just adding a little bit of extra information. I'm not predicting that the 3+2 model will die, but it has to be a lot more flexible. So that's the first issue in lifelong learning. But probably the biggest issue is, how do you fund it? I will give you an example. In times of crisis, politicians very often make very good decisions, long-term decisions. And a very prudent decision made in our last economic crisis, which was back in the 80s, was to create an individual pension scheme where everybody pays in. Jakob pays in, I pay in 17% of our salary to fund when we retire. A lot of countries, they fund it out of the state budget. I think we need to have a discussion of maybe an equivalent solution to fund lifelong learning. That you have an account where you pay in and then you can draw out. Maybe the account should be filled up by yourself and your employer, so it's a joint funding project. I also think the cost of health service will explode for societies if we don't set aside a certain funding scheme for the future. And after all, we are the ones that are going to be the costly health care people for the next generation. And why should the next generation fund that? I think we should fund that ourselves. So lifelong learning, I think some of the basics is to set up a scheme to fund it. I expect that you will be spending not 5% of your time, but maybe 20–25% of your time to acquire new skills and build on the existing skills. So I think it's actually a basic foundation for the development and maintaining our democratic societies that we come up in the European model with a robust lifelong learning scheme that also funds it. And let me just be a little high-flying. I think you cannot have democracy without a strong economy. Some people think it just funds itself. No, you need an extremely strong economy, and you need politicians that don't just optimize the present but also the future. So this is the foundation, in my view, of maintaining stable democratic societies, like the ones that we've been so prudent that our parents gave us. And we realize today, with these ludicrous things happening in the world, you called it Brexit, but it's happening all over, that we just cannot take this for granted. We took it for granted, and I've taken it for granted all my life until maybe 5 years ago, that you could just maintain this stable, democratic society, tolerant society into the future. That is no longer the case. So we need through education, through funding, and through far-sighted decisions by our politicians to build strong foundation for a future democracy. And I think this is at stake if we don't fund a lifelong learning, and that's only one pillar of a stable society. And let me give you 4 components, I think, are the characteristics of the well-functioning European countries. It's democracy, it's a balance between private and public sector, where the public sector doesn't fund everything, but it funds, for example, to main degree education. The third foundation is education. You cannot have democracy without well-educated people that have their own critical mind and don't just take an answer from the Prime Minister for an answer. They must have their own basic knowledge-based foundation for decisions. And the last is a strong economy. And all those components we've taken for granted. And we must, with our role as universities, make sure that the education part is modernized and made ready for the future challenges. Now that was one question. I think I've already spent 2 minutes. But another question is, and I think that I'll take 2 more minutes.
It's all right.
You also addressed that. Traditionally, and I think it's the same all over Europe, universities have 3 roles: research, disseminating research through education into society, and then working together with society, business, public sector, in order to disseminate knowledge, not just through students, but also through projects that you participate in with other entities than yourself. I think we have a 4th role, and I think it should actually be embedded in the legislation of universities, and that is responsibility. It is building citizens that take care not just of themselves and their own pocket of money, but of societal optimization. In an economic term, you can say you should not be allowed to optimize your own net present value and thereby minimizing your neighbor's net present value. And that's called Pareto optimality. And I think that should be taught, not just in an economic sense, but in a societal sense. And I really think it should be put into the legislation of universities that we must build citizens and not just egoists. And to a certain extent, that is one of the challenges of business schools, that we are building people saying that my main goal is to optimize net present value for myself. If everyone does that, we won't have society. And the question was asked to Coca-Cola, and I think companies like Coca-Cola have a tremendous global responsibility, not just to optimize your net present value, but to be of value to society. And I simply don't think, to be a little rude, that you'll be able to attract the right people if you don't change those values, because I don't think people will in the future be satisfied with just optimizing net present value of the company. They need a purpose. Why do I work here, and is it up to my own standards? So those were my 2 comments.
Well, your Danish timekeeping is worse than my Welsh, but but can I throw it open to questions from the audience? You've heard a little bit about what we are interested in. Why don't I throw it out to questions from the audience? I have a number of online questions, as Pear does as well. So this is supposed to be a debate, not us telling you what we think. Who wants to talk? Please.
Thanks a lot for your initial statements. I can agree with most of it. The question that I'm asking myself after listening to you is, how do we break this down concretely into the education at business schools? Does this mean We should rather educate our students into meta skills, such as reflection, such as innovativeness, entrepreneurship, critically reflecting about things, being ethical, asking the right questions. And then as we go along in the lifelong learning, they will add the skills, sort of they fill in this box, but the framework is given is produced in the university education when they come here the first 2 or 3 or 4 years. That's one. Or should we just add a little bit of this into each course? Or should we do it like we do it, and then we have one course on, now listen to what business ethics has to say about all that. So taking your statements, which I appreciate a lot, how can we break this concretely down? That's my question. What's your thought on that?
Shall I start? Or
he will start.
You better start.
No, he will start.
Okay, first of all, I don't have all the answers. I think we're all facing these dilemmas. To be a little impolite to my own country, I think, unfortunately, probably most of you have heard of an extreme financial scandal that we're facing at the moment in our country. The biggest bank of Denmark is in focus for money laundering in Eastern Europe. And why did that happen? And why didn't they bring it up when they found out? I think it's partly also the educational system's fault that we have taught them that optimizing the value of the company is the main goal. So how do you do it? Well, the first component in my view, and it's always been why I think internationalization of our education is important, we must send students out from the little cozy comfort zone of Copenhagen to see what the real world is like, and that is why we do exchange. And about 60-70% of our students, they go and exchange somewhere else. Finding out that I don't necessarily know myself all the answers to everything, maybe other cultures even have better ways of solving it, and maybe even other people with other religions are sensible people, although they have a different religion. And I think that type of tolerance and realizing that I'm probably not the best individual born on this globe is extremely necessary, and it's become much more evident that it is the last 10 years than I thought. So simply moving our students out of the local comfort zone of Vienna and Copenhagen is necessary. But of course it's not enough. And I cannot answer you how you do it, but you must, when you employ your staff, take into consideration what type of individuals are you employing at your university. And I think that's one of the best goals. And secondly, you must also be very deliberate in the criteria for admitting students to your institution. We have a challenge, I'm quite sure. We admit students with the highest GPAs of our country. With that comes cheat, people that think that they don't share knowledge with other people. They optimize their own education, maybe not their neighbors. So how do we actually manage that? I don't have the answers, but I know where the challenges are. And every cheat case ends up on my table, and they have almost exploded over the last 5 years. People forging their testimony to getting into university, it's not massive, the amount, but it's increasing. And I think it comes with the culture that we've built. So it's not just one fix, it's many, many different changes in our institutional setup. And unfortunately, I don't have a paper I can give you on how to do it. But we might exchange ideas on how to do it, especially in Sigma, for example.
I think also that the good news is that there's been a change in student attitudes to inequality, inclusive growth, and things of this kind. And these surveys aren't just the ones from the Aspen Institute in the United States, but they're surveys from a wide range of countries which say that students are moving away from what I think Pear would describe one way or another as casino capitalism, or if you like, shareholder value as the sole criterion of an enterprise, or indeed personal NPV maximization as a criterion of an individual. I was actually going to say the thing that haunts me is the GPA itis. Students, even when they study, he takes in the very best students, so do we. In SMU, so did we in Warwick. And, you know, people are more interested in what their grade is than in the development of themselves as individuals. So the question I would pose to you is, I don't have the answer to the design of the curricula. But one thing I will say is that simply paying lip service to it and adding little bits of it into courses is not going to solve the problem at all. I think exchanges are one way of doing it. Forms of integrative thinking, forms of joint working between students and faculty. There are all sorts of things we could think about doing. I don't have the answers, but the good news is that students are changing and they dislike the inequality that exists from top to bottom. And if you think that universities aren't changing, I was just reading, you know, the well-known newspaper in Britain this morning, the Mail Online, which is a bit of a rag, but it's read by 15.2 million people. They're after the universities. And what are they after the universities about? Whether the universities are doing the job they're supposed to be doing, whether the vice-chancellors, not the presidents, vice-chancellors in Britain, are getting paid too much. And there was a story in the paper this morning, I'm not going to tell you which university, you can read it yourself if you want to go to the Daily Mail Online, about the fact that a vice-chancellor was paid a rather large salary and at the same time was able to work for 30 days a year, almost doubling that person's vice-chancellor's salary. And so this is part of a wide-ranging debate about equity, societal value, which I think is coming up. And so I would endorse everything Pear said, and I'll stop there because it's your debate, not ours. Who else would like to? Jacob.
Before you ask your question, you're one of my employees, so I'll stop you. There is one very important solution to this, and that is that companies start focusing on it when they employ our students, our graduates. That you want whole people that can actually interact in society and make the company's profile responsible. That will change the students, at least my students, they're very rational. They will focus on it if they know it's part of the employment process. Sorry, Jakob.
It's perfectly okay. You would like to educate critical people, right?
Yes.
One of the things you also, besides the things that you mentioned, you could do, you could also work with the incentive systems in your own institutions. And incentive systems is for academics, it's for staff, it's for students as well. Examinations, grades. If you want to value a certain kind of attributes and characteristics, then make the incentive systems that actually support that. Most higher education institutions and business schools as well don't have that in place. I haven't seen very much of that kind anyway. So that's another area or domain where we can actually develop a lot if we want to educate the kind of people that can have that societal role that we want to do.
Yeah, I agree. And we actually had that discussion in the plane coming down. So let me give two comments. One is, I don't think equality and stable societies are founded by universities. They're founded much earlier in the education system. It's probably in the basic schooling system where the division starts. And we have a very egalitarian society. But we're starting to see, because of a change in legislation, that private schools are increasing. And the government funds part of the budget of private schools. But it also means that you segregate the most wealthy part of the society in their own little groupings. And in my view, that shouldn't be possible. And I would like to say I'm not a socialist. I'm just one citizen that would like to see stable society also for the future. And taking out the bright and well-born kids into separate schools simply does not give them the true message of what life is about, in my view. And I think that's dangerous. But we're doing it in one of the most, at least, reputational democratic societies. And I think we're going the wrong way. So this discussion here doesn't start at the university level. It starts much earlier in society. Secondly, I think education must be a group effort and not an individual effort. And we do actually incentivize students that write their thesis together with other students. And I think that's a very good system. We also incentivize people that work together in groups in solving issues and not just by themselves. So how do you build a system where you build in incentives for people to actually work together with other people? Because that's real life when you come out into the labor market. There's no problem you can solve yourself. So that's my answer. Let's increase that incentivization. How we can incentivize our teachers, you and I will think about that on the way back on the plane.
I mean, I would only say that, you know, in my experience as a dean 4 times, you know, the people who get promoted the fastest are the people who produce in the very top academic journals, A+ journals as they're often called, and that scholarship in universities has become ever more balkanized into these routines. So the whole point about what Pear's talking about, which is interdisciplinarity, until we create the incentives for people to work together more cogently, and not just to work together as academics, but to work together with students and to work together with companies and governments in jointly developing knowledge, is something that really needs to be attacked. But, you know, the incentive system works in a particular kind of way at the moment, and whether that's right or wrong, I think it's wrong. But, you know, it needs very clear judgment by people who run universities to move this thing forward, and governments, I think. It can't just lie at the level of universities. Any case, other questions? Please. And then I can't get the boss here at the moment.
The boss has a question.
Oh, yeah, but the boss is not going to get the question. The gentleman in the back is first.
Hello, Christoph Miska, International Business here from WU. One of my research areas is responsible leadership. And I've taught it at various business schools in different countries, because you mentioned that students should go abroad. And interestingly, I realized that at some point, it always comes down to the question, to the statement that was also mentioned before, the balance between profits and responsibility, which I believe is the wrong approach, because that implies a certain trade-off. And I was wondering, why does this always come up? At some schools sooner, at other ones later. Then I realized what we teach students, in most cases, unless there's business schools with a strong focus on the humanities, but what we teach them in the first place, in the first year, freshman year, is theories from the last century. Theories that have conventions that might not apply anymore. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether or not this would need to be changed, because it's perceived as a solid business background. But is it really that solid what we teach students as foundations? For example, we teach them transactional, transformational leadership as foundations, although we know that there's other forms of leadership that are required. So what are your thoughts on that?
Age before beauty, or?
Age before beauty? Who's the beauty?
Well, you can decide.
Okay, well, it looks like I'm age. So I'll try answering.
I didn't say that.
Well, either way, let me just answer your question. It isn't just transformational leadership. It is, you know, the late Sumantra Ghoshal in an article wrote that the problem was we taught people immoral theories. And the immoral theories were things that people won Nobel Peace Prizes in economics on. I mean, he was talking about Gene Farmer and others in terms of efficient markets. I mean, I don't think that the teaching of theories is the problem. What needs to happen in liberal management education is the questioning of those theories. There's nothing that a good theory generates debate. It's the questioning of those theories that I think is lacking in many educational institutions. So to me, that would be a partial answer to your question. Since I don't know the leadership literature, I have no idea what transformational leadership is, except that I know that it doesn't exist in Britain at the moment.
Yes. Actually, I don't think there is a dilemma. I think the problem, in my view, is that we've been so much focusing on growth being the only solution to progress, and growth being growth in our own spending capabilities. And I, at least, and I know many that have the same view, are much more incentivized by political decisions that influence the future and influence the well-being of the next generation than influencing my well-being, because I've had ample, actually. So I think if you have long-term decisions and politicians that actually can think more than one election period, and partly I think part of the problem is built into the whole system of being re-elected and how you're re-elected, which drives short-termism, then I think you could easily have an optimization of responsibility and profitability. If you're not responsible, you will not have a long-term business model, at least not with the societies that we are living in. You will be out of business. So I think on the long term, responsibility will be absolutely the foundation of being profitable. But our political systems have not kept up, in my view, and that's the fundamental problem that the Western European democracies have. We are much too short-term in the way we elect and the way we make our politicians responsible. And in reality, we have a 4-year election period. You are in election for 2.5 of those 4 years. So you have 1.5 years immediately after you're elected to make the right decisions. Just look at Macron, for example. And then the next 2.5 years, you're in election. And then you're trying to buy the votes. And I think it's a fundamental problem of the basis of our democracies. But my answer is, I don't think there's a dichotomy between responsibility and profitability. It's an issue of time horizon.
Excellent. Well, I would like to come back to your first introduction, remark saying, let's focus on Europe and the European system. Now we all are going for those international accreditations, EQUIS, ACSB, AMBA. They all have standards, and as the name and the label says, it's more about being streamlined. So my question would be, is there a European way of doing business, and therefore is there a European way of doing business education, and how does it look like?
You are an European, I may not be in a month, so you can you can answer it first.
Well, first of all, your last statement, I would like to say, it really shatters some of the fundamental ideals of Europe, if and when that happens. And it's a tragedy.
Yes, it is. I agree with you.
But it's even more a tragedy to Britain itself.
Yes, I think so.
Because you're going to ruin that country.
Well, we haven't done it yet.
No. So, yes, of course, eventually we have to take responsibility for a global world. We cannot just optimize Europe. That time is gone. But for now, we can talk about Europe because we have our own problems. We have ample challenges of our own model. And I think we should gather up the prestigious universities of Europe, and in this case the prestigious business schools, and set our own standards so we can get a little free of these ranking systems and international accreditation systems, but set our own standards instead, because we are the foundation of our societies, we being the universities. We are one of the pillars, and we are extremely important for this development. But we have to be a little more aware of being politically active, I think. When I started at CBS, the first issue I brought up, no, not the first, it took me a year to bring it up with the chairman of our board, was whether I should be the prime minister of the institution and the minister of interior, or the prime minister and the foreign secretary. And we decided I should be the second, i.e. to build loyalty among constituents outside the university, in this case CBS, because the support for CBS internally was immaculate. And I think we need to be more outgoing as presidents and make sure that we have support in society, and if we don't, what is it we have to change ourselves? Normally, university presidents' reaction is, you go and change. We have found out the right model ourselves, but we must be in service to society, in my view. We cannot think that because we've been there for 1,000 years or 2,000 years, that model is also the right model for the future. So I think we should be much more able to listen to our owners, which in case of our country is Parliament, and the future.
I would say two things. I mean, as an European, a confessed European. First thing is, I think the Europeans have a wonderful tradition in undergraduate management education, which the rest of the world needs to learn about. I know this because I've just finished a book which Cambridge University Press are going to print, so if anybody wants to read it in about 9 months' time, I'm making this argument, and I'm making the argument that it's from the Europeans that the tradition of undergraduate management and liberal management education comes, not from the Americans. And if you go and look at the history of institutional history of American business schools, it's clearly untrue that it came there. So the Europeans have a tradition. What is also the case, and I agree with Pear 100% here, Europeans largely have civil societies. If there's an inclusive form of capitalism, there isn't this unbridled shareholder capitalism that you see embedded in many of the routines of, for example, the accreditation agencies that emerge out of the US. And I'm not mentioning the name because I'm being taped, and therefore, but you know who I'm talking about. They were founded in 1916. I think accreditation standards are not what we should be achieving. I would just make one other point, and I agree with Pear absolutely, but one other point is, I noticed the other day that there was an uproar in Britain when it was discovered that of the applicants to Oxford in a given year, 42% of the people arriving and in those places came from the top 8 private schools in the UK. Okay, and Eton is one of them, and you probably know all the rest because they've fathered many prime ministers in the UK. I came from a Welsh mining background, so quite frankly, I'd rather see far more equality in terms of the people going into university. I also favour European democratic forms of capitalism, inclusive capitalism, stakeholder forms of capitalism, and I think the Europeans should stress it. I happen to think that EFMD does a very good job, at least in trying to press an European view. So I would, in part, accept EFMD from the implied criticism I made of others.
May I give a last comment? Sorry.
Yeah, please, and you can wrap up because our timekeeper there. You give a last comment and wrap up and say what wonderful people we all are.
No, we can only say that about you.
No. Please.
I think it's prudent for at least people like us that have profited from the post-war stability of 3/4 of a century and taken it for granted. And suddenly found out that stability shall not be taken for granted. That is what we have been talking about today, in my view, is the foundation of that stability for the future. And how can we build that into education? And it's partly through the recruitment system of our teachers, but certainly also of our students. We need to be part of the solution of maintaining sound stability of our future societies, and that is being questioned. Brexit is, in my view, a lesson to Britain of an unequal society. What's happening in America is exactly the same, and in parts of Europe, it's creeping in. And as I said, I'm not a socialist. It's not an ideological driven. It's simply pragmatism. How do we secure stability in societies that can think not just about ourselves, but also 2-3 generations into the future? And universities must and will have a very crucial role there. But if we keep on working as we do, with, for example, being accredited being accredited by one term, which, for example, is what is the increase in salary after you've taken this education? How can you measure the increase in responsibility? And that's one of our problems. We do not create students that have an enormous increase in salary because of our equal society. But maybe it's worth more to society if the increase in responsibility was measured. So my final comment is, universities are here also for the stability of future society. And it's much more evident today than 10 years ago that role we must take on. I would actually, if I should change my life, I would become a politician today. I was extremely scathing about politicians 10, 15 years ago, but now I see how important it is that we actually elect the right politicians. That's my last comment.
And I will stop there because I could carry on, but I won't. Thank you ever so much for your attention, and we'll move to the next item, which is going to be Edith, who's going to be interrogating a student, right? Yeah, I shall be sitting watching with great eagerness as to what she says. Thank you.
We heard many points, and now that's a bit different setting. I'm interviewing a student, Katrin Haas. She is a first semester student, undergraduate studies. She's a student of the Bachelor of Business Economics, a new English, fully English bachelor program that we have here at WU. She has just written an exam. She just came back from an exam. Let me start with one point. I think in the old days, when I started my university studies, things were very easy. I am a born Viennese. So it was for me quite clear there was no choice other than studying in Vienna or in Austria. I wanted to study business because at that time I was only thinking of getting a decent job, making a career. Don't know if this turned out, but at least I stayed here. Not many things to consider. Nowadays, it was a time when the university education was very much supply-oriented, which means that we had professors that were giving lectures. We had not much choices but to listen to them or going home. Today, the business is very different. Business education is a very competitive industry, has become a very competitive industry. We are marketing programs as if they were products. Some even speak about students as consumers or clients. I'm not going that far. I still think we are co-creating something, and we are not in a supplier and consumer relationship. But we'll talk about that if you want. But the thing is, I think this generation now has far more options than we had at the past. And I would like to start with questioning you. What made you choose the new business program, Business of Economics, which appealed to you? Taking this product, let me put it that way, and not taking any other product?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say that I'm not from Vienna, so I'm from a smaller town in Austria. And I always knew that business was interesting for me. I love finances, I love languages, I love the international atmosphere that business has. And the new bachelor in business and economics with the focus on the English language and international relations was very appealing, and I wanted to leave my small town, so to say, and go to a bigger city like Vienna. But I don't see Vienna as my final destination, so I may focus on some international things as well. But as a first step, Vienna was the best offer for me to become a bit more international, meeting new people and have a new perspective.
Thank you. Let me just tell you a little bit about this new bachelor program, because this program has been set up in a way that is maybe a little bit different than other bachelor programs in business. It is not a bachelor program which focuses on a certain business area. It doesn't even focus on business per se. It's as a business and economics program, which means it's a very broad program. And in accordance to what I've heard before, it is set up in a way that the students in the first semester do not have subjects like finance, accounting, marketing, economics. They will have this at a later stage. But what were the first 2 courses that you had in this semester?
So there were 3. The business and society one, that was like a whole picture of what business and economics can be like or should be like. And then we had contemporary challenges, which was focusing on the challenges we face, like climate change, poverty, and globalization. And we have had the math course, where the exam is next week. And I thought, first of all, this is going to be a lot about calculating things, and it turned out to be a lot more about programming. So this was definitely a challenge, but a nice one, and it still is. But it definitely, I had some other expectations of what a math course is going to be like. So there are new perspectives also.
You like it so far, or is it? You said it's different from what you expected. Is it very challenging? Because the topics are very interdisciplinary, so it's not a very functional-driven curriculum so far. You think this is very much for a student in the first semester, or is it something that you find interesting?
No, I really like that as you said, the subjects are all kind of related to each other. Like, I just arrived from the course in business planning, and we also have parallelly the course in governance. And I can already see the interrelations and how things interact, and this is definitely an advantage. But there is definitely some challenge. Like I said, the programming, I am from normal high school, so I've never had any computer focused lectures or anything like that. So there is a lot of hard work to do, also not at university, but at home. But at the end, if the result is nice, then it will be nice.
You write in your statement, and I quote you, "For most students, business is not only about business anymore," and you write, "We want to broaden our horizon and we want to make a positive impact." To me, this seems very much like Generation Z. You are one of generation, or you belong to the last generation. And this statement would be very unusual for my generation, or the generation of the Generation X, where most of the people just wanted to have a decent job and earn money. How would you explain, what would you, in your own words, feel as making an impact? And another point would be, what can a university like WU contribute to you making an impact? Do you want to do this during your studies or after graduating? And what could we do to help you to achieve this goal?
So making an impact starts basically right now. I try to make an impact in my day-to-day life, like producing less waste and focusing on climate and all that stuff. So I'm definitely a conscious person in that perspective. And that is what I mean by making an impact, that I can, with the education I get, that I can change some things to the positive. And it's not about, so in my case, it's not about the salary I will get. I will definitely focus on what I can do and what I can provide. And of course, salary will be important to finance my day-to-day life and all that stuff. But I just don't want to go to work just to earn money, but I just want to work to feel good about it and really see that I can change things and that I can have an impact. And the university should just help me to have some methods, or that I know things, how to have the best impact, so that I really can optimize my impact, so to say.
Would you say this is kind of a generation thing, or is this something that you as a person specifically wants and you don't see with your friends or with your colleagues at the university? Or would you say that there is a movement within your generation to stress more the value of sense making and things like that?
There's definitely a change in the generation, I would say. I just can see it with my colleagues. A lot of them are vegan. They just try to produce less waste, all that stuff. I mean, there will always be some that just go to WU and want to be top-level managers, earn a lot of money, and that's it. There are still a lot of these around, but there are also some around that just have other different hobbies than just reading the economic part of the newspaper. They also go into culture and they travel, they want to see things, and they're also concerned about society and poverty around the world.
I agree with you, because we have a number of extracurricular activities, volunteering and so on, and we see also a growing trend in a number of students to participate in these programs and to do something during their studies which contributes not only to society but also to their personal, I'd say, development. So I would also say see it like that. Let's go to the point of participating in extracurricular activities and things and so forth. Those programs are for many students quite attractive, but at the same time, they are demanding, time-consuming and demanding. In Europe, we have a situation that is quite different than in other parts of the world, where many of our students are also part-time students, which means that they have jobs on the side, they're doing some work on the side. So it looks a little bit as a contradiction that we say on one hand side we want to have students that engage in extracurricular activities and engage in all kinds of other activities. At the same time, they are doing work on parallel to their studies. In your point of view, in the first semester, maybe you're not working, but you might have talked to other students that are in other semesters or more advanced. What could the university do to somehow solve this puzzle, enabling students to get extracurricular experience and do something to have an impact, but at the same time fulfill some jobs which they need to sustain them their studies?
I would say that combining studies and a full-time job or just a part-time job is definitely a challenge, because university expects a lot from us, and so we just have to focus on university or working, and therefore spending a bit more time on our studies. And university should kind of build a path maybe to this combination. So like that university maybe offers jobs or just has some relations with other companies so that they can recommend their students, and also the company can then focus on these students and help them and provide them with timetables or some work that is easily done from home or even from being at university. And so even that your work can be built into your courses, so that you maybe have a presentation about your work and therefore get some points, I don't know. But there are definitely some ways to do that, but I don't see many of them right now, to be honest.
I think student experience is very interesting for this topic. So first round of questions to Katrin.
May I ask you how high school did prepare you for a business education program?
Not really, I would say. I had normal courses in German, in English, in math, but it was the basic knowledge you can get from a high school, so there was no orientation on economics or anything like that. There are some schools in Austria, but I never decided for one of them. Because they are in some kind not that well reputed, so I stick to the normal high school, the AHS in Austria, and it was a good decision, I think, given the options you have in Austria, but there could be more focus or more specializations, because in a high school you cannot decide to focus more on that or to drive into this thing. You just take what you get and that's it.
My question is somehow related to the question that was already asked. I'm really interested what sparked your interest in business then. So you have just explained that you haven't had too much business matters discussed at school. So what sparked your interest? That's the first part of my question. And the second part would be, do you think that people are aware of how much impact they actually have on everyday business, like with their own economic decisions that they make every day? Do you think that they are aware of how much they could change if they wanted to?
So your first question, what sparked my interest? I cannot say that it was school, really. I think it's more of familiar. So my family is the background for it. My parents are not working in economy. They're both doctors, but my dad always focused on the financial part of his work as well. So, and I was very much into numbers and calculations. When I was little, like the pocket money I get, I would write some list on how to spend it and how much I spend in a month and that things. So I was really into the analytical stuff. And I also was very much into the cultural stuff. So I really always wanted to go international. I traveled a lot. And that's what I thought was best for me, to combine these things in a business study so that I can just focus on calculations and meeting other people and also doing some stuff like having an impact. And your second question about people having an impact, I would say that a lot of people may be aware, but they're just ignoring it. So for example, it's the day-to-day life. If I go into a supermarket, I see people grabbing the plastic bag to just put one banana in it, and then they grab another one at the cash register and pay even 20 cents for it, just because they want to hold their banana in 2 plastic bags. But the problem is in our society that you just cannot always tell people don't do that, because if they are like, or if they feel pressure, they won't do it, and they will just do what they think is best. But the awareness is here maybe, but people are not willing to change a lot, in my opinion.
Yeah, what I have to say is probably more a comment than a question, because one question was raised earlier, whether the school is preparing you for business school. I'm actually quite happy that it's not the case, because we're talking about liberal management education at university. I think what you get in our high schools, or the form that you have been choosing, is exactly that, and we can talk about the quality and whether all subjects are necessary, but I think that's a point in your life where you get this liberal education, so I'm actually quite happy about that.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that you share your knowledge and your courage. And I have a very general question to you. What kind of support do you need from the university to achieve your goals? Because what I see from my students that they are often very stressed by different expectations. They feel on them like studying, working, doing other hobbies, or also volunteering, and also they appreciate some true personal discussions. So what is that you need?
What I need from university is definitely kind of a network, so that I come to university and feel at home, so that I know people, I know where I have to go if I have questions, and that I know where I have to go if I just want to meet and just talk. And that's a thing about community, but also support in a way. For example, in Austria, it's the thing that a high performance is not always regarded as the best thing. So very motivated students are often put aside and not supported in a way they would wish for. So there should also be some support for these students that are definitely willing to do more, but maybe they just cannot because there are no options. And this university also should provide some specialization, some meetings for people that want to and not just the people that have to.
I'm taking the liberty of asking two questions. One is very concrete. How many VU students have a job at the level of Master of Science?
At the Master of Science?
Yes. What percentage of students have a job at the same time?
I would say about 70–75%.
Okay. Yes, it's about the same at our university. So the second question is really, what are the benefits of having a job while you study? And I would like to hear, maybe even both of you, your interpretation of that. In my view, there are to some people enormous benefits of having a job at the same time as you're studying. And therefore we have lobbied for many years to have a 4-year master as an option. And that's just been introduced legally, that you can take your Master of Science over 4 years if you have minimum a 25-hour per week job in a company that has a relevant job for the academic topic you're studying. So I would like to ask you, what do you see as the benefits, apart from the money side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The income side.
Yeah, I agree with you that for some students that have jobs that are connected with the field of study, it makes enormous amount of sense, because they can combine the theory that they learn with the practical experience, and that is also what firms like to see with the undergraduates that are not pursuing a graduate study, but they want to enter the marketplace immediately. But we also see a number of students that just does jobs for additional monetary benefits, and this is big of a problem, because this does not add to the, some students agree, or some students they say it adds to the personal development, but I definitely see the cons weighing more than the pros in that respect. And honestly, we have to say that at the moment, we as a university, we get punishment if our students do less than a certain amount of ECTS per year. And this has to be changed, because if we allow students to work, we cannot do anything against it, but if we, let's say, foster students to work besides their studies, I think there should be a regulation that is not punishing the university for that.
Yeah, my comment on that.
What does the student say?
I would say that a job can make sense, definitely. But for me, for example, in a first semester of a bachelor, it would not make a lot of sense, because I know what my studies are about, but I have not the knowledge to input it into the company or where I'm working. So I think there should be some generating knowledge and then implementing it where I work, but therefore I have to study for 1 or 2 years to get that job that I wish for, that I know what I want to do, and that I also can use my knowledge. In the first semester, I would not say that it is very likely that I will find this job.
Thanks, Katrin, for sharing all your insights. I find it very encouraging and positive how you talk about these grand challenges that lie ahead of us. And you were referring specifically to environmental issues, but of course there's many more. And I think it's great that you look at it through this perspective of having an impact, because that's a very positive way of tackling these issues. And in this way, I was wondering, I understand it's early in your studies, but is there something that you feel you're able to take away from what you've learned so far that might help you in the future address those challenges like artificial intelligence, migration, environmental challenges, any skills or competencies that you feel already now in this early stage you can take away?
In this early stage, it is difficult to say, but I would even say that the programming course in maths that we have helps us in a kind of way to understand artificial knowledge even a bit better. And maybe the thing right now is that I understand things better. I cannot really say that I already know how to change things, and I don't really have like the method of how to do it. For that, it would be too early, I guess. But I know where the key challenges are and where we have to focus on. And that's the thing that in the first semester I got from university, I would say.
If I may add, perhaps that's even more important than understanding how you can do it, just understanding what's going on.
Okay. We have talked about the problem of combining studies with work, and one of the solutions that very often comes up in our era of digitalization is, why don't we use much more blended learning? Why don't we use digital resources? And of course, this is something that very much turns up in undergraduate fields, where we have, of course, bigger groups, not in your specific study, but you know that WU each year receives around 4,000 new students in our big bachelor program. So the era of digitalization gives us hope to handle those students better and at the same time give them more flexible studying paths. How would you value that comparing using digital, let's say, learning formats with the typical, what you have learned or have seen so far, present time formats? How would you value it? How much of that would you like to see in the undergraduate program in the digital from the digital resource, and how much would you value present time of interactive learning patterns?
I value digital learning concepts more as a support thing. So I would say that if you have a lecture and you want to recap it, you can go into the internet and just read the slides or whatever. But in my opinion, just being present physically is important in a way, first of all, that you can ask your professor directly, but also to meet your other fellow students so that you can interchange and that you can communicate. Because if I just sit at home in front of my computer, I could also be home in Klagenfurt, where I'm from, in my small town, and just see all the things on the internet and not having anyone to discuss it. So I see that being present at lectures is definitely a thing people should do and should still focus on, the university should focus on.
Thank you. So I think we have now come to the end. I think they will. Thank you very much, Katrin. Thank you. Big applause. First semester. I think a small rearrangement will take place because we are now building the plenary over here.
Pear, you said it's about European democracy, and also Howard was mentioning the importance, but we have still, we have Hungarian discussions on the role of CEU. We have Poland, we have even other examples, Denmark. So,
and we have Sweden.
Yeah. So what are we going to change now? How are we going to have those ideas realized in terms of having an impact on society, having an impact on society via business education? Because we're not an engineering school.
No.
We're teaching business and economics. What makes us different from engineering and more natural sciences schools?
Well, in that sense, we're not different. I think an engineer student should also have the same sense of responsibility to society. It's not a specific business school issue, but maybe it's a little bigger at the business school because we are taught and have taught profit maximization. And it's becoming evident that that can be detrimental to society. So, but I don't think it's only a business school issue. I think it's not just business as usual. I think we're being challenged, and as I said, Brexit is a sign of that. It's an enormous transformation of the whole Northern European culture if Britain pulls out of the European Union. The whole EU experiment is being challenged. So I think it's not just trying to amend small challenges, it's a tremendous challenge that we have, because Europe has been the builder of societies for 2,000 years. Not just for 50 years, not just since the Second World War. And now suddenly we're finding what's happening in Hungary. Maybe you haven't heard about what's happened in Sweden. Sweden doesn't even have a government yet after the last election, because they cannot form a government. Why? Because the ÖFD of Sweden swept into parliament because the two previous governmental parties, they had kept them out of politics. They've said, no, we don't want to collaborate with you. No, you cannot get any influence there. They swept in with almost 20% of the votes, and they have not, after 3-4 months, been able to form a government. Nobody would have thought that could be possible in a stable Northern European social welfare state and democracy. So we're being enormously challenged. And maybe it's just a president that's getting a little more gray-haired, like the two of us, but I don't think it is. I actually think it is a different scenario, a fundamental change over the last 10 years. Brexit is just a sign.
Okay,
electing Trump is a sign.
How are we going to change our curriculum tomorrow? We have our head of the Senate here. He is listening and taking notes. How are we going to change curriculum? Immediately, obviously.
Well, I quite like the sound of the Bachelor of Business program. It's very much like the idea that I have about liberal management education. I was actually taking the opportunity of asking our student colleague, in her experience thus far, how much were the students collaborating or how much were they competing? Because that's an interesting question. And without, and I'm not going to answer on your behalf, but she said, well, she expected to see more collaboration, but unless I misunderstood what you said, it would get a little bit more competitive towards the end of the degree. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's what I would expect, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I think that the question of collaboration, liberal management education for me is, Pear talked a moment ago about Danske Bank. There are other banks, as you and I know, and my experience in Asia, without mentioning one or two banks there, they've been money laundering too, one way or another. So the question you ask after a period of time is, what allowed that to happen? I mean, Denmark is a pretty stable country, I would have thought. Anytime I go there, and it's got Nordic noir as well, which is, a television phenomenon. It's very much widely accepted. I look at Britain and I say to myself, I do feel European. I was telling somebody the story earlier on, I think you. First time I went to Europe, I come from a Welsh mining valley, so I went to school, university in London. Then I got a fellowship in the University of Chicago and went to America. The first place I'd been to outside of the UK was America. When I came back, I then started going to Europe. I mean, I didn't have the money before then, but I did go to Europe, and I've been all across Europe. I mean, I feel an European. So the sense that I feel about Europe is, one of the things that history teaches us is the question of cycles. Business and economic history tells us exactly what happened in the global financial crisis, except nobody was really teaching many of the business school students that business and economic history. I mean, you all know the reasons for the exuberance that took place, people selling mortgages to people that didn't exist, real estate people doing all sorts of misdeeds. But, not one of them's gone to jail that I've seen. The people who've extracted value from society are the finance people. And for those of you who are interested in a book on that subject, there's this, I think she must be Italian, but she's an Italian academic in University College London, Mariana Mazzucato, who's written two books. One, I can't remember, one's called The Enterprise State, and the other one is something about everything. I can't remember the title. But she's making the very, very point that I've just made. The point is that, you know, we have changed in terms of this society, in terms of the way we operate. And you see in Britain now much more desire to look at inclusive forms of capitalism, the kinds of models that I think are in European management education and liberal management education. I mean, if you're asking me what I do about Brexit, I have no idea, and I only hope it's solved by sensible people before the worst happens. And the worst that could happen is us dropping out without any form of logic, is the only way I would describe it. So I'm hoping that that changes. But I don't know that I can answer the question about curriculum. What I do think is it should be much more balanced.
But Katrin, do you feel be a European, and what does this mean to you?
I definitely feel being European. I have to admit, I even feel more European than I feel Austrian, because Europe is a lot more about culture. I mean, just look at us going to an Italian restaurant in the evening, or having a glass of wine from France, whatever. You have so many cultures in Europe, and just about your holidays, they're often not in the country where you are from. You travel through Europe, and you meet a lot of people also at VU from other member states. So the connection is even stronger within Europe from different countries than a connection from different states of Austria could be. So I would say that the European feeling is very strong, also with other students, so not just me.
Now, when I just one moment, I would like to throw in an issue coming up a few months ago. So Macron had this famous speech at the Sorbonne University arguing for European identity, for Europe, strong Europe. And he came up with the idea of the European universities. Now there is this call inviting European schools, high schools, universities, applied universities, private university, whatsoever, to come up with some ideas of a European university. What would you as a student expect from this idea of a European university, kind of a network university? Do you have any idea?
A European university is maybe with even more students from abroad, so that there should not be, for example, in Austria, a majority of Austrians, but Austrians should be equal to people coming from UK or from wherever. So there should really be a mixture, and also this mixture should be seen in the professors. So there should be a lot of professors from abroad and not just Austrian or from the country where they are lecturing.
Howard, European universities, is this a good idea, theoretically or practically?
Well, I'm not sure what the overall Macron concept is. Is this a network-based university with universities joining in from different countries? Is that the idea?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very broad call. So what they make is actually is kind of a, I would say, a call for new ideas. Yeah. And universities and institutions are challenged to come up with some innovative projects on what it could mean.
Well, I'm on record already as saying that the European traditions in management education are significant and have been historically. The German Cameralist School, the Grande École in France. You could go through a whole set of traditions that characterize European universities. So some form of collaboration, to me, is sensible and meaningful. I would also like to see collaboration outside of Europe as well. I mean, I don't think an European university has to have an identity that's solely European. I mean, there's a lot going on in Latin America that's interesting. For those of us who are interested in inclusive growth, Africa is a tremendous challenge. But the whole question of democratizing productivity in Africa is huge. So I think the concept of an European university is great. I mean, I think I think the notion that Europe has a tradition in management education, particularly liberal management education, I would see the identity of that European university as being liberal management education, but not including solely European schools.
But this was the idea. So now, Clement was giving me a sign. He wants to interrupt.
Thank you. I think the question of European universities is very interesting because the way this idea came along reminded me in some way of how the US idea of President Trump of Space Force came along. He just threw it out there, and in this way I had the feeling when I heard about European universities that Macron's idea was something like that. The idea is very smart, but as Howard said, what does it mean? I think, and this will be an interesting thing to figure out, but it is the same mechanism or the same idea of throwing concepts out there that we see from populist movements, and that we see in social science. We call it post-factualism. We don't have facts. We don't have the scientific background for anything. We just have an idea and a story, and we throw it out there, and we see how people react to that. I think many of the problems that were discussed today, Brexit, are based on these populist movements and these post-factualism ideas of just good storytelling and have people believe whatever they want to believe. How can universities who think and work completely different react to that?
Pear, how are you going to react to this?
Well, two comments. The specific example you are delivering is based on the tragedy of having a population that's not educated. A very big part of the British population is simply out of society. They're not educated. That's why education is so extremely important to democracies, that people have their own view and can build their own view on, is this fake news or is this okay? And thereby elect sound politicians or unsound politicians. So I think the tragedy of Britain is class difference, where an enormous part of the population is not educated. And it's not the only country of Europe that has that challenge. And this is a very crude way of talking about Britain, but I'm afraid it's true. So the concept of the European University I would rather like to talk about. I think there's a very obvious step 2 of student exchange, and the next step could be joint programs across our universities, where we mix our student deliberately into not 10 universities, but maybe just 2, 3, 4 universities, where we simply say, we will build a joint program, 25% of the students will come from each university. We will physically move a quarter of the time of the master between our universities. That alone will build an enormous cultural understanding. Yeah. And we actually do that today, but it's fairly expensive. It's a much more expensive education model than just sending them through the sausage factory. But I think that could be the concept. Not 10, 20, 30 universities, but just 3, 4, 5 universities per program. And we're actually doing that. We only have, is it 4 programs we have that are designed like that? And one of the questions I have with me to you, Edeltraud, is exactly would you like to go into, and this is not one I invented now, it was invented before I left Copenhagen, to go into such a venture of finding 1 or 2 programs where we would mix our students.
Yep. We already had a discussion, we will join this. But I do have another question from the audience, please.
Thank you for your very, very fascinating points. I just want to raise maybe a point. If you look at universities, how they cooperate internationally in Europe, I think compared to other sectors of society, business or politics or in general, I feel, or that is only my impression, that there is already a lot of cooperation happening on an academic level internationally. I mean, of course, it can always increase, it can always be better, but I think there is already a lot happening at the moment. Now, the people or the problems that we are facing as a society, as a global community, the people who are affected by those problems most inherently are not, I think, people who go to university. because if you go to university, you're an academic, you most likely you will earn more money, you're more mobile, you will be less affected by the social issues that we have. So how big do you think is the power of universities to actually affect those problems in the sense that we're talking about right now?
Please.
We are not the solution to that. That starts at the basic schooling, i.e. at the age of 5, 6 years from then on. And that's the tragedy of Britain, that it takes half a century to get there. You can't just fix it. So we are not the solution to that big problem. It's the whole building of the education system from scratch. And it's dangerous to have a part of the population that's not educated. And that's what's happened in a couple of countries. It's the same in the United States. That's what elected Trump. So it's a fundamental problem for the next century, not for the next decade.
But I think there might be a solution. So what we, for instance, tries to step in. So we said we cannot wait until the school system will change, in particular in terms of preparing students also for economic and societal issues we have. So Professor Fuhrmann is here. She's an expert on economic literacy, which is an issue for us as a business school. And we try currently to build up what we call WU for Juniors, which is an online campus for students and for high school kids, granting them access to knowledge on economic and business issues, hoping that this will make a contribution despite the formal schooling institutions, which might also be a little bit discouraging in terms of even increasing inequality, as we know. So I think there could be the new ways of teaching, new ways of offering online courses and having access to things could be at least one thing we can do as universities.
Plus, I would also like to add to the great comments that were taken or made here, actually, that also companies can do a lot. What, for example, Coca-Cola is doing is also stepping into this to, first of all, provide additional purpose for employees, but nevertheless also do contribute to the wealth of society. Is that we have a program that is called Youth Empowered, and is actually tackling youth that is not mainly going to university, but also has, like in education, to really ramp them up and give them additional education to find jobs, and also helping them through the networks of suppliers and retailers to get first jobs. And I think that's very important as well, that companies step in here and do their part as well, because they have a great network, yeah, and a lot of resources as well, and money to fund, yeah.
I have one more question. Maybe this is one for you.
Thank you. Well, I very much appreciate the discussion about the European University, and I do find that idea very appealing. At the same time, I think we need to just take some facts into account. That is, for instance, in the field of management, the top journals are owned by US journals, and I think in economics it's the same. So the knowledge that is produced and is landing at some point in textbooks is pretty much gatekeeped by US-dominated editors-in-chief, which may be a good thing, it may be not such a good thing, but this is just how it is these days. And that's also how we base our recruiting decisions on, to some extent at least, when we hire faculty. So there is some US domination, I think, to some extent in the field of management and economics research, and thus also in education. The other tension, I think, that comes in is that governments increasingly apply a controlling approach to universities, where they count and measure, and they want to have the numbers in place and so on. So I think we can be very philosophical and maybe also somehow romantic about the European University, but taking all these facts into account, which are simply there and they won't go away for quite some time, I think we probably have to start out a little bit more modest, as you say, Pear, with student exchange programs, and maybe defining what is it actually what the European University makes different from what kind of university, the Chinese university or the US university. So I would be interested in carving out a little bit the identity of a European university, taking into account these pressures and tensions which are simply there, which I just mentioned. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Howard and Pear, I guess this is a question for you.
Could I say one thing before I am going to answer your question? I just wanted to say something to Pear about British education system. You know, the high school system is pretty good. In my judgment, the failure of the British education system is when Margaret Thatcher got rid of technical colleges and community colleges, which were essentially routes for people to gain higher education, but of a more applied and vocational kind. So the criticism I would have of British education is not that British universities don't offer a good training, or a large number of them do. It is that we don't have the intermediate set of training for people who will never, gain from a liberal management education, but will be people who will be gainfully employed and will contribute to society in ways that are important. I mean, we need, I don't want to get into the immigration debate in Britain, but part of the Brexit problem was that people said, well, these immigrants are taking British jobs. I mean, this is complete nonsense. And when Pear said they were told stories, they were told stories. But, truthfully, the British education system at one stage was, I think, excellent. I mean, I have to say that my father left school in Wales at 13. He was one of a family of 9. But he went to night school and technical college and went to university as a mature student. The roots were there. The roots got taken away at a certain point in time. And I totally agree with him about the value of education. That said, and I was really just answering him on the way, I think the European identity is what's important. I mean, what you're telling me is what I can tell you as well. If you go and have a look at any of the ranking systems, the Financial Times ranking of business schools, what does it depend upon? Well, it depends upon PhD-trained faculty, but your point about, and it's a point Jacob made earlier on, they count a journal publication. How are the Chinese schools? I mean, have a look at the Chinese schools. They've been playing the American game. How many Chinese schools are in the top 100 of the FT rankings? I can tell you in 2005, hardly any. My guess at the moment is between 12 and 15 in the top 100. Because you're right, it is a US-dominated game. It doesn't have to be a US-dominated game. I understand what you're telling me about the journals, but we have to build our own quality journals. And if you look at the last 10 or 20 years in the European context, we have been building appropriate journals. I think the British Journal of Management, for example, is a very, very good journal. It's not A in the American sense, but it's a strong Journal of Management Studies, which is a British journal that's been going over 30 years. It's an A-. So I would say to us that the solution is in part in our own hands. I mean, you can say, well, US domination, and you're quite right. When it comes to ranking school schemes, they are US dominated. There is no question. Whether it's the FT Business Week or whatever other ranking you want to mention, you're quite right. I can't solve that one. But I think the European identity question, and I do think that doing it by small steps is right. I mean, one of the things that I thought was brilliant about our program in Singapore Management University was not only did we have liberal management education, but we insisted that every student did a community service project, 80 hours, and they get graded on it. So it's either, looking at low-income workers in Singapore, and there are plenty of them. There really are. Within half a mile of Singapore Management University, plenty of them. But also villages in Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Indonesia. I mean, this is the way to build up this kind of capital. I think, global university models. I mean, with the greatest respect to one of our politicians, Tony Blair, it sounds like a Tony Blair concept. You know, it's interesting in theory, but in practice, I think you have to go through small steps and collaboration. You have great universities in Europe. There are great universities in Britain, there are great universities in Denmark, there are great universities in Austria and France. I don't see why some limited forms of cooperation, exchange agreements, I'm with what's being said here. But as for American domination, I have to admit, I was trained in the United States. I spent 25 years of my career in various institutions, east and west of the United States, but I'm European.
Pear, please.
Yeah, I had to write down my comments. So I have 3 comments. One is on the monopoly issue. Denmark has taken the European publishers to the European court, and actually the court has accepted. This is only 6 weeks ago or so. And so this is not just an American issue, it's also the monopoly of the knowledge created in universities given to the publishers. It's very interesting to see what happens with that court case, but they did not dismiss it, they actually accepted it. So it's starting, and the reason for doing it is, why should we pay Danish tax money on creating research results that then become limited by the publishers to the global market? Why should we do that? It's ludicrous. So it will be very interesting to see what happens. My second comment is totally supporting Howard's comment about the importance of the European model. I think Merkel expressed it amicably and very prudent. Now Europe has to find out that we have to be on our own. America is not there in the future for our economic security, for our military security. We have to build our own model. And that's, in my view, why it's so tragic that Britain is choosing a different way. We have to build.
Hasn't chosen it yet.
Thank you. Thank you. So how do we do that? Education is not about just giving students academic skills. It's also building the future leaders. And that's why responsibility is so important. So how do we do that? Part of it is knowing that you don't always know the best answer yourself, i.e. tolerance and a little bit of humbleness by finding out that a student from Austria came up with a much better solution than myself. So I would build it step by step by, we have an alliance called Sigma, build joint programs where we mix our students, mix our teachers, and just go step by step. One of the biggest conflicts that we will have to handle, or the next generation, will be the conflict in the Middle East between religions. We also have to build that understanding into our programs. But I agree, don't make a grand design, one step by one step, and joint programs, I think, should be the first step, and mix our students.
Okay, I think we have to come slowly to an end, so let me put some last questions. Bettina, what in 10 years ahead, what will make a difference to be an WU alumni to lead a company? Why would we see that this is a WU alumni leading the company? What will make the difference?
Being a good communicator, valuing diversity, building relationships, yeah. Of course, having a good knowledge base, but focusing on those things, I think, will be good. And overall, business acumen, I think, is still very important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Katrin, in 10 years, when you imagine where you will be, and you will have this impact on society.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. How would you say, what would it be that we can see that we have done a good job in educating you?
I would say that I have found a way to combine things. So not just combining my business knowledge, but also knowledge from other faculties, like technical knowledge or even knowledge in nutrition, whatever, just to come up with methods, that I know how to combine business with key challenges that we're facing, and that I know that business is not just isolated, but with the interaction of people and therefore the exchange of knowledge, that we can have an impact and have solutions all together. That would be a wish from myself.
And Pear, now again for you, in 10 years, how will our cooperation look like?
Well, very short answer, two comments. One is, of course, you need to know your basic skills. I'm sure that mathematical skills will be in demand also in 100 years. So there are some basic academic skills you need to learn, but you need to have a moral compass. You need some sort of, no, my guts tell me this is not the right solution. And that you cannot just build up through, you can't read it in a book. It's a culture you have to build, and that's where universities are so important. So those are the two main components. Be aware that there are basic skills we need to learn, but on top of that, and we have not been aware of that, you also need a societal compass, a moral compass. And as I say, you can't read a textbook about that. It's how the leaders of the institutions act, the leaders of companies act, how our politicians act, and we can build cases in where it went wrong into education. And we have a brilliant case in Denmark now, and we're going to use it. We're already writing cases about how did this happen, and how could we have avoided it.
Thank you. Howard, as member of the International Advisory Board, what can you recommend to VU, given all the things we said today?
I thought you were going to ask me a more interesting question than solving
VU's
problem.
I'm really selfish. I'm really, really selfish now.
Well, I think VU starting this undergraduate program in bachelor's in business is tremendously important. I was asking Adeltrud a moment ago how many students were in the program, 120. I then asked her, well, what are the applications for next year? Well, you have 1,200 students trying to get 120 places. This seems to me to be minor evidence, but at least strong evidence of students feeling the response, that this kind of program can do something for them. But I think in many ways, VU should go back to the fact that many of the philosophers of universities were Europeans. Von Humboldt, Cardinal Newman. What did Cardinal Newman talk about? Skills of analysis and synthesis. I mean, the whole question of education is education in the broad sense. And I think management education should be broader. I think that it's not just liberal management education, which I think is a tremendous European tradition, and you should push it harder and further. But I think it should transcend into the graduate programs as well. If we're going to solve the problem of the kinds of things that Pear is talking about, which I agree with entirely, the concept of societal tolerance, the concept of trust, the concept of belief that things are going to work properly. I mean, and let me give you evidence of that, of what I think. I mean, what I think of the current American president, whose name I'm not going to mention in case he is watching it and saying it's fake news. The case of the current American president, I think, is a tremendous example of this phenomenon of what Pear called the lack of education in society, the huge gulf between rich and poor. But the most telling thing was watching the funeral of George Bush and actually looking at what was then said afterwards. And some people may read the press as much as I do, but I read a thing called Swamp Notes in the Financial Times. I have both the written edition and the digital edition. And the word that this guy who wrote the Swamp Notes, whose name I've forgotten for the moment, the word he said that had sort of really inspired Americans, and they were watching it. I mean, they were watching the one in Washington and Trump's reaction. And then they were watching the funeral in Texas where he flew to Houston, then went in an open carriage to College Station where he was buried in the presidential library. And the word he used was, people looked at Bush and said, there was a man of humility, he wasn't a grandstander, and the thing that characterized him above all else, and the word he used was experience. And I think when it comes to liberal management education, having academics with experience, having academics who've been around, just like we're sending students around everywhere, academics who've been around have that experience and are willing to share it. I mean, grandstanding is a characteristic in academic life. We've all seen it. We go to conferences. Some person stands up and BS's for 20 minutes about, how great he or she is. But the people who really have an inspiration on people are the teachers in these institutions. We have a responsibility. But I think being humble, making sure that we have the passion and enthusiasm to teach people, and we are respected for what we know, which I think is a tremendous tradition in Europe, and in Asia, actually, and in Africa, by the way. The Africans respect experience and wisdom. I mean, my wife and I were in a hotel in South Africa, in Johannesburg, actually, about a year ago, and it had a breakfast buffet. And she saw the waitress saw my grey hair and said, "Dada, you must sit down. I will bring you whatever you want." I think we need to build the level of respect between our students and ourselves, the respect for us as academics in trying to inculcate these values. How we do it, you've asked me the question what we would do. I don't have the answer. But I think if we have the passion and enthusiasm and belief that we're trying to do the right things, somehow or other it'll come. And that's why I would agree with Pear's prescription for VU, which is it should engage in small partnerships through it, if you like it, Sigma network, and build, mini vehicles for achieving these goals. And the maxi vehicles will come long after I'm 6 feet under. Even if I'm going to live to 100 with your wonderful statistics today about life expectancy, but whatever it is, it's us and the body corporate and academic life is going to have to change things.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, as always in academic discussions, we end up with more questions than with those we started. However, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for being online, on site. So we will close this session here, but we will have a chance to have a bit more discussion informally in our Business Education Jam lounge.
I have a little present from Copenhagen.
Yes, please. Already.
This is for you.
Thank you. I love CBS.
Yes.
I even love more CBS partnering with VU.
And you can see, it has a magnet in it, so you can put it in your pocket.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
So join us for tea, for cookie, even wine.
I love CBS.
In the Sitzungssaal 1, which is in the AD building. We will still be online in terms of our homepage is online. We will put on there some material. We will try to wrap up a little bit things we have discussed today, and hopefully see you soon again. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a nice day. Thank you.